I mean, absolutely devastating scenes we've seen in Afghanistan over the weekend. A lot of people are asking, particularly the families of those who lost their lives. So was it 457 Brits who lost their lives in Afghanistan? Was it all worth it? What was the point of it all if the British and the Americans are withdrawing right now?
Well, it was worth it, and all of those people who sacrificed their lives and fought in Afghanistan and were severely wounded, they did it for a reason, and the reason was pure and simple, was to prevent Afghanistan from again becoming a terrorist haven from which the West could be attacked as it was on 9/11. They achieved that mission at great cost, great military cost, and also great financial cost for 20 years. And in doing so, saved the lives of many people in our country and other countries who could well have been hit by terrorism. So it wasn't in vain, it wasn't wasted, but their sacrifice is now being betrayed. And the future of Afghanistan is not really in question. The future of Afghanistan is again to become a safe haven for terrorism, and that's all 100% down to the decision by President Biden to withdraw unconditionally from Afghanistan at very short notice, without even giving the Afghan government and forces the time really to prepare and plan to face a new situation.
I mean, the defence that people are giving of Joe Biden's decision is, I suppose, twofold, really. One is that Donald Trump actually signed this peace deal last year, giving in to the Taliban. They made various promises about not giving safe haven to Al Qaeda again. Whether you take that as a promise worth trusting, but also that at any point, whenever American forces withdraw from what Donald Trump called this forever war, 20 years on now, at any point when Western American forces withdraw, this was always going to happen, in which case, what's the point in staying another few weeks, months, years, or even decades? What would you say to that?
Well, I think President Biden might wish to blame President Trump for his decision, for Biden's decision, but he spent most of his presidency undoing pretty much everything that Trump did during his presidency. Yet he seems to have not undone this decision, and not only not undone it, but actually implemented it directly and completely. So there's no one really to blame for the decision apart from President Biden himself. And in terms of when, at some point this is going to come about, that's not really the case in my view. I think that these we've been there 20 years. It's a hugely long time, but these sort of campaigns can take a very long time. You just look at the situation in Korea today. The Korean War ended in the 50s. It didn't actually end, but there was an armistice in the 50s, and the US forces are still in Korea. We had a war in Cyprus decades ago between the Turks and the Greeks. UN forces, including British forces, are still in Cyprus decades and decades later, far longer. We were 30 years in Northern Ireland, or 35 years. So 20 years might seem a long time, and it is, but until this, if it's worth the sacrifice, if it's worth being there, then it's worth staying there until the job is properly done.
And is this part of the issue in terms of the failure of Western diplomacy, particularly in the 21st century? It's lots of the lessons learned, or perhaps the wrong lessons learned from Iraq and Afghanistan in the early part of the century, that we fight wars on electoral cycles of 4 or 5 years. Every American president gets elected on being more isolationist than the last. They then get dragged into wars or start wars or continue wars. Joe Biden said, look, he was not going to leave this to a fifth president to have to deal with. But of course, forces like the Taliban, like Al Qaeda, ISIS, they are fighting, existential battles. They see battles for what they view should be civilization, and they are willing to fight for decades. Let's face it, you've seen Al Qaeda and Taliban. They were fighting the British century ago, the Russians, the Americans for the last 20 years. They are in it for the long haul, and we don't really have the fight in us anymore in the West. Is there a concern that the Western willingness and ability to protect the things that we value has collapsed?
You're absolutely right, and it is all about political cycles. President Obama pulled all forces out of Iraq in order to win the following election the following year, and that was done precipitately. It was done inadvisedly, and it resulted directly in the rise of the Islamic State. And US forces and British forces had to go back in. So, and we're seeing the same here. We're seeing, a situation where we won't, I don't think we'll be going back in, but we're certainly going to see the equivalent of the rise of the Islamic State. And I think the comments you make about our failure to kind of see things through is absolutely right. And it's not just in terms of time frame, it's also in terms of the kind of conduct of military operations. The Taliban are prepared to conduct and do whatever it takes to succeed. The same goes for other jihadists around the world. We are not prepared to do that. We are so risk averse in some ways, and I'm not now criticizing British or American troops that fought in Afghanistan, but I think we held off. We held ourselves short too often when engaging the Taliban, and that contributed to the situation that exists now.
Yeah. And just finally, I must ask you about, two particular concerns a lot of people have today. One is the Afghan interpreters, all the others who bravely helped the Western forces, and how we can make sure that they and their families can seek safety. We know they are a huge risk from the Taliban, but also, of course, the plight of women and girls in Afghanistan now. Tell us your concerns.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned earlier, our ambassador, Sir Laurie Bristow, as I understand it, remains today now in Kabul, issuing visas personally and trying his best to look after British nationals out there, as well as embassy locally employed staff. And I'm sure he's doing his best for people who work with the British forces in Afghanistan as well and getting them back. And it's right that they should be coming back as quickly as we can get them. And in terms of women's and girls' rights, that's a huge problem. We're back to the 7th century. We're back to where the Taliban had things before 9/11. Women will be forced to wear veils covering them head to foot. They will not be allowed to leave home without their male guardians, and they will probably not, in many cases, so probably most cases, will not be allowed to work. The Taliban will reintroduce stoning to death for adultery for women, numerous other savage treatments like amputation, execution for transgressing relatively minor rules. And people, not just women, but the people of Afghanistan as a whole, will be living in the dark ages again. It's absolutely terrible to see. I know many people who are in Afghanistan at the moment. I got to know that a lot of people when I was out there several years back now. And it's really terrifying to imagine what they are facing today as the Taliban are moved in to Kabul and then will take over the whole country.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Colonel Richard Kemp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, thank you so much for joining us.